and welcome to Reliving My Youth. My name is Noel Woman. My guest today is Thaao Penghlis. Now, Thaao is probably best known for portraying Tony DiMera and Andre DiMera on Days of Our Lives, but he actually got his start on daytime television portraying Victor Cassadine on General Hospital. Thao's been in soaps for over 40 years. He's had an amazing career, but his real passion project is his new podcast called The Lost Treasures. The adventure story explores the Iliad and The Odyssey through the life of Heinrich Schliemann, who is considered the father of modern archaeology. Thaao went to amazing places for his 3-part podcast. He shares some of the stories. The 4th part of the podcast is why he decided to do this, and he shares some real-life danger that Thaao got involved with. We discussed that. We discussed Thanksgiving. Thaao, such a gentleman. I really enjoyed my conversation with him, and I hope you do as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's nice to talk to an adult who likes the same things you do, and we can share that experience. It's kind of nice also to talk to people who've never heard of these stories and let them in on things they've missed out on. I had great teachers. We had to know from the beginning when I took classes in New York. We had to learn about respect. We had to learn about boundaries. We had to learn about all the issues that make you as an actor understand a character by the way you interpret those boundaries. Because, today the very young, will talk to a 20-year-old the same he will talk to a 70-year-old. There's no differentiation. And
Right.
as actors, in order to develop character, you have to let the audience know how you speak to that person. And so, when I was doing Days all those years, I learned a lot, because even though it was fast, I was part of a world like the Stellar Atlas, Iliad Kazan, the theater that I saw in New York. They taught us, and you know what? It sustains. That's why those stories sustain, and that's why they become classics. The others will go, you go to a movie and you remember popcorn more than you do the story, because there's
Right.
no story. It's all noise,
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to start with one thing, but I was going to ask you one quick question. Being on Days for like 4 decades now, what was the difference between when you started and then like when like you finished? Just like young and up and coming actors and like just the production. Like, has there been a change? Like, I know you mentioned about people talking, like younger adults talking how they would 20-year-old to like a 70-year-old, but when did you really notice the shift in that while you were working on the show?
Well, the beginnings were not easy, because the brain can't recall that much dialogue. It's not trained, it's a muscle. So you have to adjust to that. The fear factor, overcoming that, the impatience that certain actors have who've been there for a while, don't have the patience to work with an actor who's just starting. They throw you the ball and you catch it and you don't pass it back. So for me, I had to learn fast. I had a few insults in my beginning by some of the actors who really did not welcome me well. Also, I was ethnic.
Right.
So when I came on, it was all very Anglo. And so, who are you? And the way I dressed or the way I spoke, it was foreign in those days, in the 80s. And also, because I started on General Hospital,
Right.
It broke boundaries. So I started with the Cassadines, and then I went to Days of Our Lives and started the DiMera family, and then Joe Moscolo came in. But as I went along, and I got to know that the shoes I wore or the suit that I put on gave me the attitude, so that when I came into the studio one way as myself. When I put those clothes on and the makeup, when I walked through the doors of the studio, I became somebody else, because the shoes to me were always the most important factor. It helped me know how to strut, how to walk, how to sit, the kind of clothing I chose to wear. So it's all part of the frame that you create for the audience to see. Do they like it? Well, I was fortunate that the people liked my character because he was different. I sounded different. And so as we went along and people started to appreciate that I was trained, it's just the dialogue was too hard for me to remember. But when I started to expand that muscle, I found that I could stand on my own. And so I started to see how some of the actors, especially the male actors, were not as warm towards me. They kind of felt threatened. Part of it was because I played diabolical men. I was not easy to know. I also didn't give the secrets up too quickly. I saved some for the take so that actors were not as steady with me, but that was part of being the villain, when I was doing. So it was it's a game. It's how you play the game. Some people love it, love sharing it, throw you the ball. It makes them better. It changes what they expected to say or the way they would say it. So all that is part of what the teachings of the earlier part of my life brought to me. And the same when we talked about, cooking, it's the same thing. What ingredients do you put in that makes the result of this recipe? It's the same as an actor. What do you put in as a character, attitude, the way you listen, the way you dress, the way you confront? All those things are part of what cooking, because I love cooking, allowed me to understand. Because I always think, if you can understand one area of life, then you can put that whole premise to another. The confidence also that it gives you. So the other night I cooked, I had 10 people, and I cooked Greek food. I started with the Greek meatballs, and I started with my crab dip, and I started with what was it? Crab, the meatballs, and the scallops that I do with capers. And I slowly would pass around, and then I made moussaka, and that took me altogether from the night before 5 hours to finally come together. So that was a lot of work. It's like you do it coming to Thanksgiving. That takes a lot of hours to prepare. And people eat within 15 minutes, and you think, I just spent 2 days together. And people are just talking away and everything. Firstly, they'll say, oh, this is delicious, or this is wonderful. The table looks wonderful. The atmosphere of the room, the smell, the spices that you have smell in the room, the flowers that you may have. The guests dress a different way, having a few drinks in the afternoon. And it's a family gathering where people are pleasant as opposed to argumentative.
Right.
And so, so the moussaka came out really well. So the bechamel sauce took a while, but it all came out really well. It was a very successful dinner. So I'm not going to do Thanksgiving for the first time this year. I decided I was invited somewhere else, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to somebody else's kitchen and see how they do it, so that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. So what would you bring?
What would I bring?
Yeah, for Thanksgiving.
I said to, usually Greeks, you never ask them when they say to you, what do you want us to bring? You don't do that. You just bring, a surprise gift or whatever. Most people bring a bottle of wine. People bring flowers. So I said to the host, Rick Birch, his name is, he directed the Olympics in Australia and in China with Spielberg, and he called me up. He married a Polish woman, and she and I hit it off. So she said, "Oh, please, I invite Thaao." So he calls me up. I haven't seen him in a year because they've been living in Poland. And he says, "Well, I said, what would you like? What will I bring you?" He says, "No. You've invited us so many times to your house, that no. Please just come as yourself. Bring a date if you wish, but come as yourself." So I've got to take something.
Yeah,
So
that's
I don't
good.
know. Maybe I'll take chocolates. I don't know. Maybe, but for Beata, maybe some beautiful flowers or something.
Okay.
The only thing you worry about flowers is if they're in a vase, you're driving and it's a
Right.
distance time going. So it's all those things that you have to consider. But this is my first year. I usually take care of orphans,
Okay.
who don't have family anymore. But I've decided to be kind to myself this year. I've got other things I have to do. And so, it takes you a few days.
Yes. Yeah.
How about
Thanks.
you? How
Yeah.
about you? Is your
Yeah.
wife cooking?
No, Thanksgiving is the one holiday we don't do. We go to my brother-in-law and his wife, so it's a Jewish Italian marriage. It's
Oh,
food is a big deal. So we always we'll bring a dessert. My wife likes to bake, and my daughter loves to bake. So I'm sure they'll do something, and I'll just watch, and then I'll enjoy it when
and you tell them a few stories. It'll be
Exactly. We all try to keep it pleasant and be thankful for each other and the food as well. So it's always a great holiday to be with family and enjoy food. So,
good. That's nice.
so what would you think? You mentioned before about days and stuff like that. So, what do you think the biggest misconception is about soap operas?
Hmm. There've been many. Somehow I think daytime, because that's when people work. People work during the day. So what are you watching television for? You should be working. So I think in a way, people are comfortable watching television at night because they've accomplished their day and they've done their job. But to watch daytime means, well, it used to be selling products. Soap operas were selling
Right.
products like that. And then people like the executive producer who brought the Luke and Laura story,
Mhm.
she changed the format, Gloria Monty, and what she brought to it was a different size to the story, to the characters that were played, to the sets, to the music. She brought a whole different element, and it changed daytime because people had to compete and because they saw the audience and how large it was. When I arrived on days, there were still cobwebs there. You know what I mean? It was old sets,
Right.
and so it was like looking at old America. And so they had to change it and modernize. So I think daytime, because it's fast and because it's serial form, and because sometimes actors get their beginnings on soaps, so therefore the talent is not as evolved as you would go and see a nighttime series. There's something about having to learn your lines and having one rehearsal so you'll know for the cameraman where they're going to shoot you. It's not really for the actor, but for the actor, it's about getting out the lines. Then you have to do it in one take. And then if you've got 9 scenes back to back, you can't always give your best performance. I mean, it's like getting scrambled eggs every day. Do you know what I mean? Instead of
Right.
a roast or
Yeah.
something that makes you go, oh, wow. So occasionally you'll get good actors, and we've had some good actors, especially the Joe Moscolos,
Right. Yeah.
those who've been around, the vets.
Mhm.
The young ones, yeah, there's some good ones, they're and also they want the young ones because they're pretty and I said yes, but have you seen the way they act? Some of them
Yeah.
they haven't been trained at all, and I think that's what gives a bad reputation. There are parts of daytime that if you've ever been to the daytime Emmys as opposed to the nighttime Emmys,
Okay.
the sounds and the screams by the actors when their show wins is so, it's like it's like, are they serious? Can they just applaud at nighttime? they applaud.
Right.
But daytime, they scream. It's like going into a supermarket instead of going into where you're dressed nighttime. So how does costume make you perform that way? So that's the only thing about daytime. It shows from its beginnings that it's not as classy.
Hmm.
It doesn't have so. And I find a lot of it is. I find a lot of it's rigged, and they may hate me for saying this, but I feel
Right.
like a lot of the shows, impose on the actors who are voting who to vote for, who to concentrate on, and so if your performance is better than theirs, they'll vote you out, so you don't have to don't compete. So you're lucky if you win an Emmy,
Right.
but at the same time, they forget who won. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't add to your salary. Whereas at nighttime, it adds to your salary. Movie Oscars adds to your salary.
Right.
In daytime, so it doesn't have the same attributes. The only great, I loved my characters. I loved the stories I've had. What I've loved more is that it afforded me the journeys that I took.
Right.
That was my reward. And also because I got to know some wonderful people who have become very close friends of mine, especially Leanne Hunley and Lauren Pogler. Those actors I really appreciate. The men, not so much.
Right.
They're a different breed, I find.
Yeah, but one man I'm sure you really enjoyed was obviously Joseph, who played your father, Stefano. Legends on the show. You have any good stories that you can share about Joe?
Yeah, I'll tell you a story. In the end, at first, he and I came from the same workshop. I recommended Joe. I was on the show 6 months before he was, and they said, we're going to bring on your father. And then I said, well, I have an actor that would be just fabulous for it. And that was Joe. And Joe and I had just having rehearsed Lion in Winter, where he played the king and I played the prince from France, the future king of France. And so we got along really well. Plus, I enjoyed the fact that Joe was a wonderful classical musician. He was a man of many talents. But in the end, dementia came to him.
Yeah.
So I remember one time when I was about to start working with him, and he was screaming at people, and I knew about dementia because my brother-in-law had died of it, and I remember putting my hand on his hand when he was losing it, and I said, "Oh, because people who have dementia remember the past.
Right.
You don't push them into the future because they don't understand that." So I just put my hand on his hand and I just mentioned to him, "Do you remember how great we were together? Do you remember those wonderful scenes?" So I mentioned the scenes. He said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "Remember when you did this? Oh, yeah. Wasn't that wonderful?" So I got him into a mood that suddenly brought him into the present. And the crew, couldn't in the booth, they didn't understand. What did he just do? What did he just do? How did he calm Joe? We did the scene. Finished the scene, and as soon as he went to go up, he started screaming again. But at that moment, Joe and I was Stefano and Tony. And, in the end, when he had to leave, I was used to, I've been killed 7 times. So I'm,
Right.
well, I won't go into that, but Joe was walking out and he said, "This is it." And he realized that his character had died. And then this is it. So I realized he'd been living this character for many, many years, but he loved his character.
Right.
You have to love who you're playing. That's part of the magic. If you don't like who you're playing, it's going to show.
Of course.
It can be mediocre. But for him, walking down that hall, realizing that it was over, that was sad to see. And I remember then in the end, I went over to him in his room and said, "Joe, I'm going home now." So I kissed him goodbye. And as I walked out, he turned to somebody and said, "Who is that?" That was the most difficult thing.
Right.
In the end, that which was so magical between us had been forgotten. And that's the sad thing about what happens to people's minds. But while he was there, he was a beauty. Just
Right.
great memories of him.
Yeah. I mean, you have the memories, so that's great. Yeah. My grandfather passed away due to dementia, and yeah, it's not pleasant. It's not
Yeah.
a terrible disease. So when you were on the show and you see that big portrait of him in the mansion, like what are your emotions towards that?
You know, you used to watch all those movies like Rebecca and all those classical movies. There's always a portrait, but usually, you know, it was a portrait that was ominous and villainous, you know,
Right.
or something would come from it. When I look up at Joe and I see the aristocrat, I think, I see a man that we spent so many years together. So when I look at him, and it's hard to believe that he's gone, but when I look at him with such nostalgia, I think that we both gave each other something very special. He left forgetting it, though. But you know, to tell you a story quickly, I had a friend who's a psychic, and he was across from me reading me, and with his eyes closed, and then he said, "Oh my God, who is this pushy person? Who is this pushy person trying to come in?" Well, I said, "I don't know. What's his?" He's saying his name is Joseph, and he's saying, "What the F have they done to my family?" So we've lost a bit of the DiMeras, I think, on the show.
Right.
We've lost what they've stood for.
Mm.
It was a differentiation between the good, the bad, the sophisticated, the normal, the diabolical, to the innocent. It's kind of become flat.
Right.
To me. It's lost that meaning. But he was, so I understood what he was saying. I even told my producer that, and he laughed his head off. I said, "There's a bit of truth in that. What have you done to my family?" You know, because, you know, we were the DiMeras. We were a certain ethnic. You know, they started to bring actors on playing DiMeras who were more Anglo.
Mm.
You know what I mean? It's that
Right.
kind of casting that is not, I thought, kind of took away. You know, I'm a purist. You know, I like things also done well. I don't like kind of excuses. I mean, you know, the trouble is they run out of stories, you know, and they keep stealing from others or doing whatever. But it's not just daytime, even nighttime. I mean, after one was going, you know, this doesn't resonate anymore.
Yeah.
So many, you know, these are the days we're seeing. It's like a factory. We're seeing so much, but we don't have the people behind the scenes who care enough or are knowledgeable enough or sophisticated enough to make it better than what it should be.
Yeah. I would imagine it's more of just like a factory line now. Just get the product out there. It doesn't really matter the quality. It's just get it out there and move on to the next one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not that they're not capable. It's just the pressure of getting it out now. You know, we've got talented people on our show. It's just that we've got to do it so fast.
Right.
Because budget. It's all about money. Everything's about money these days. Was it before? Maybe it was, but we didn't put it up as a neon sign. You know, it was subtle. So we get it. We get the fact that we're being pushed. We get the fact that, you know, be prepared 3 scenes before, so we're not calling you again. You know, things like that. Never used to be that way.
Right. Was it hard for you to keep secrets? Like you obviously film so far in advance before the show actually airs. Was it hard for you to like, keep storylines to yourself?
Boy, did I get into trouble. But then I was, you know, I was a bit of a instigator, I suppose. No, when the time about who was the particular killer, I had gone to Israel.
Okay.
And I was having a wonderful time in Israel. Even the Mossad, as I said in my story, they circled me and thought I was a terrorist. But I went and did a big news story for NBC. So they said to me, so who's the killer? And I said, oh, well, when is this story going to be published? They said, oh, not for 4 months. I said, well, it's so-and-so. Well, that person, journalist, went and told another person. Another person told another person. Before you knew it, it was on the internet.
Yeah.
When I came back, I'm called up. He says, you try, I think it was the time when I was going to be killed off again.
Right.
You tried to ruin the show. I said, why would I do that? He says, why would you tell the killer story there? Because I said, they told me it was not going to be published for another 3 months. It didn't dawn on me that they were going to betray me and go and spread the news really fast because it was a big story.
Yeah.
They changed the story. It upped the ratings because people thought it was Marlena.
Right.
So they changed it and made it somebody else. So it did draw in the audience, but at the same time, it taught me a great lesson about you don't tell. Doesn't matter when it's happening. You know how it is. I won't tell.
Of
If
course.
you promise, I won't tell. I said,
Yeah.
of course not. So that was. I even said, I remember saying to my producer, you think I went all the way to Israel to destroy the show?
Right.
Yeah. I wanted to do that. So anyway, I was forgiven.
Right.
I died, and then I was brought back a year later.
Yeah. Right. And like you mentioned, you've died, like, I believe 7 times. So I'm not going to ask you favorite deaths. That's kind of boring. But when you found out you're dying for the first time, like, how do you react to that?
Well, the first time when I left the show was my choice.
Okay.
I went on to do Mission Impossible.
Right.
When they called me up and they said, we're going to kill the character, I had just lost my parents that week. So I was not in the best of mood. And the producer, it's different now. They'll just call you up and say, oh, we're killing the story, killing the character. They called me up and there were 5 of them in the room. And they said, we're going to kill the character. And I looked and I thought, why would you kill this character? It's one of the more interesting characters from what I gather from people. And then I got up and I remember saying to them, it's something more interesting, not that you're killing me, but who you're keeping. And do me a favor, the next time you're going to tell an actor that he's going to be killed off, do it after he finishes these scenes. So I had to go downstairs and do scenes after they had told me I was going to die. And I remember an actress saying, what's the matter? And I said, they're going to kill me off again. And they went, what? So I had to play with that. But I used it. I kind of, in my mind, killed them all myself. Being the villain that I was, I decided in my mind, I'm going to kill them all. That's how I played.
Yeah.
So you might as well make fun of it. And but the thing is, and I always would advise actors, leave well.
Right.
Leave well. Don't make too much noise. Don't start. And I thank them and listen, it was a good job. But then, of course, they called me back again. And so it happened 7 times. So after the 7th time, you're going, oh, can I just go up the stairs and disappear for a while?
Exactly.
Looks like is what I've done with Anna now. We haven't been up to that. So it looks like we've disappeared, which is fine because I've been doing my podcast and other things.
Yeah. And I'm going to mention the podcast in one quick second. But do you feel like you could, like, the deaths kind of lose meaning after, say, the 5th, 6th, 7th one?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's almost like people can't take it seriously, and you must try to say to them, have them just disappear, but they want to make a rating, rating. And now people don't take it seriously. Oh, they'll be back. In Salem, they'd never die.
Right.
So in many ways, it's good because actors can come back. It's not such a, it's not such a deadline, that it's never going to be presented again. So,
Yeah.
but
So
I never got fired because I was bad.
right.
That's one thing I must say. It wasn't because of my work. I think it was a particular writer who's somebody had gone to him and said, I said his scripts were terrible, which is not true. I always learned what was written and tried to make the best of it. And so the competition and the way people played the games, I know who the actors were. They're still there. Well, one of them's still there. But if someone wants to get rid of you because you're competition, it's amazing. I mean, it's not just in daytime; it happens everywhere.
Right.
The amount of competition is fierce.
Has that happened a lot where you might have a character who's really successful, but they just don't mesh well with the producer slash writer for that particular character?
I've never had that problem. I never caused that. That
Right.
was somebody's lie. So that when I left, and then I came back when that writer was fired, when they came back, they got rid of me right away. So they held the gripe. There was one producer, I think by the name of Tomlin, who wanted to get rid of the vets.
Okay.
Because we want to see young people now. We don't want to see the old.
Right.
I'm thinking, do you know who our audience is? And it was funny because when I saw him coming down the hall, I don't care anymore at this stage of my life with these stories, but I saw him walking down the hall. I didn't know who he was. And I leant over to a friend and said, whoever this man is, if he's an actor, he should play Iago. And he comes up to me and goes, hello, Thaao, I'm your new producer. And as he left, I turned around to my friend, I said, I'm dead. And within a month, I was dead.
Right.
What they don't understand, they think they have the young, we're going to stop and see the young. Someone said to me, oh, yeah, but they're pretty when they take their shirts up. And I said, I got to tell you honestly, people will get sick of it. How many times can you watch it? Even the actors get tired of it because they feel like they're being used in
Right.
not in a positive way. But why get rid of the vets? The reason why the show has sustained itself is because we become part of people's family.
Of course, yeah.
So but people have jobs, they do what they want to do with it, and he didn't last very long.
Right. Well, yeah, he made a stupid decision by killing you off. So yeah, again. So yeah, absolutely. I've been with my wife for almost 30 years now, like started dating when we were young. So we were in college together, and I was the only person in our like group of friends who had a VCR. So obviously I had to record days for her. I had another friend who was a big Young and the Restless fan. So the shows kind of overlapped a little bit, and they were like, "Oh, can I record, Young and Restless? Can I record days?" And being, diplomatic and knowing I don't want to really piss off my girlfriend at the time slash, future wife. I'm like, all right, we'll give half hour for each of them. Half hour became 40 minutes for her, then 45, and then eventually I just recorded the whole show for her, and I kind of left my friend out in the cold. So. But yeah, so and that was in the mid 90s when obviously, the big story back then was Marlena being possessed by the devil. So that's when I started watching it. And then apparently, she was possessed once again a few years ago. Like you mentioned, can't come up with new stories. You have to kind of recycle them, right?
Right. It didn't have the effect
No.
the original did. The original was really very good.
Right.
And I remember at one point, I said to Marlena, really stare at me and I said, is the wall strong enough to take my fall? And the producer said, what are you going to do? I said, what I really would like to do is that she's going to stare at me so hard that it takes me across the room and I fly against the wall. So they had 3 crew members standing behind the wall, holding it up as I went back. But that's an actor being creative because it wasn't in the scene.
Right.
I mean, I think Calavati did a decent job of doing this story, but it's like if someone says to you, "Oh, I've never had turkey before," and they have it, and they go, "Oh, wow!" But the next time, it's going to be, "Oh, I've had turkey, and it's good."
Yeah,
So it doesn't
right.
have the same effect. It's like so we repeat stories, and not just in daytime, in everything. I
Yeah.
mean, sequels,
Mm.
not sequel, it all becomes tedious. And because people think because the stories of these movies, you can bring it in, it takes less advertising.
Right.
Advertising is a huge cost. So there's many reasons as to why people do it.
But one story that is really intriguing and fantastic is your podcast, the Lost Treasures. It's out all the podcast sites as well. It starts out as a trilogy, so it's 3 episodes, and the last episode is kind of why you did it, and it is fantastic. And plus you have the voice that makes the topic, which is a fantastic topic anyway, more enjoyable to listen to. So congratulations on the success of the podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's been a privilege to do. I never thought of myself as a writer. Um, I always was a history buff, and I considered myself a modern man walking an ancient road. And what I found on that road, I found that is really a fantastic story. So I went through so many documents, so many books on the Schliemann character, and it was such a wonderful love story. And as well, and the fact that he became the father of archaeology. So that story really intrigued me. And so, I'd go to Troy and I'd sit at the edge of those 9 cities built over each other. And I thought to myself, my God, right in front of me is where the Great War between the Greeks and the Trojans took place. And I walked amongst it, and the ruins. And it just, my imagination just kind of,
Mhm.
it's the way, and as an actor, how do you become a better actor? I think, you build your foundation, you build your imagination. And then when I went to Mycenae in Greece, which I did quite a few times, and then I was given permission to go into Schliemann's mansion and by myself and explore his whole house. I met the Minister of Culture, who was very generous in his time to me. And then going to Crawshaw, to Kefalonia, and understanding where I was standing was a valley. And a scholar said to me, "Do you realize that where we're standing used to be the sea,
Mhm.
and it separated 2 islands, one called Agostoli, which in ancient times was Ithaca, and this is Kefalonia, and that used to be a mountain up there, and 2/3 of it came down in such a major earthquake between the 4th and 6th century, and it filled it up." And there I was standing, and I thought, my God, I'm standing where a major piece of history took place, and where it changed, and where Ithaca got lost. Now they're discovering where it is. And so after a while, I thought to myself, I've had such a great life. Just the idea that I'm in the last of it, I thought to myself, geez, now that it's getting interesting, because I'm mature enough to understand what came before me. Um, and so I said to Major, why don't I do a chapter on the reason I did the podcast? And what ended up taking place was all those incredible stories during my travels, from the Mossad agents to Hezbollah, thinking I was a spy, to getting kidnapped at the pyramids. All these, all out of the story, and I keep finding out new things. So I don't know where it's going to go, but I wrote a book called Places, and I have some
Right.
great stories in there. And when I went to Bethlehem, and because I loved Israel, and even though many of those stories had been told, we all have different eyes and different experiences in the way we see it. And when I went to Bethlehem, I thought I was being kidnapped because the cab driver ended up taking me in 3 cars in order to get to the spot of where the Christ was born. And then to find out that it was all locked up because what's going on now? Same situation. So they shut it down, couldn't get in until a monk came out and recognized me from Mission Impossible. And the Israelis said, no, 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 no. And he said to me, this is a pilgrim. And I loved the word. I thought, oh my God, I like that word.
Right.
Think about being a pilgrim. And he got me in. And when there was nobody else, and I sat at that spot for such a long time. And so those privileges that I've gotten because of my curiosity or because I was recognized, even when I climbed Mount Moses and I went to the top, and I remember it was dawn and the light was coming up, that what you call God's light. And there was a monk, 95 years old, who lived at the top. And for the first time that year, it was the day of the bread. And they would pick him up at 95 and carry him all the way down, which was quite a distance. And he said to me, thank you for coming. And I said to him in Greek, why would you thank me to have this privilege? And he says, because when you walk the path, you keep it alive. And so that kind of stayed with me. And I just love the experience. And so all those things, there's so much to do. We think we've found so much in archaeology when we realize now with what they call the LiDAR system, where they can, by satellite, look beneath 4 feet and see what else is there. So, as long as I can travel, even though it's getting more difficult and more uncomfortable, overcrowded, bad food, I'm still curious about what we don't know.
When did your love affair of archaeology start, and when did you first hear of Heinrich Schliemann?
My love of archaeology started when I was 8. I remember running up the stairs in my house, and my father, to brag, all the men, Greek men, were talking about who their sons were. And then my father said, well, what are you going to do when you get older? I said, I'm going to be an archaeologist. Oh, my father was so proud because it sounded good. Well, acting had taken over, but I did the second best thing, and I became my own archaeologist by exploring, and I found treasures in the earth in Egypt. And your second part of your question was, how did I get interested in Schliemann? It was in 1976 of a book that came out, the love story basically of Schliemann and Sophia Gastromenos, who he met when she was 16. He was looking, when he found Troy, he wanted his Helen of Troy by his side. So he chose a 16-year-old girl and took her and trained her. And she became a great asset. And she carried on with his work after he died. But, he died sadly. And basically, he had a bad ear infection and he collapsed in the gutter of Naples, and they knew who he was. That he looked like a pauper because he was in disarray, and he kind of died pretty much quickly after that. And I remember reading about how she waited for him at the port of Piraeus of his ship coming home while he was in a lead casket and coming home. And she waited for him. Was like, it's like the old history, it was such a romantic thing for me. And so I decided to go to his, to Schliemann's at the first cemetery of Athens. I went, sitting up high on the hill is this mortuary temple of Schliemann, it's where he's buried. And I thought, oh, and his family there, but there were flowers in a vase. And I thought, oh, someone's still thinking of him because he has no heirs.
Right.
No heirs at all. And it was a monument, really, it was a miniature Acropolis. And all around the whole piece is the relief of all his work, of how he discovered Troy and Mycenae and his workmen and his wife, and him holding up the book of the Iliad because he always believed it was a map to finding Troy. So, all that, it stayed with me for many years. And then I thought, well, what do you do with all this? You can't sit at a table and tell people, I want to tell you a story,
Right.
like they can obviously listen. It's just too deep. People want to laugh and all that. So, so I tell them my dangerous stories and the parts where I got myself into trouble, and where they tried to arrest me overseas, or where they spat in my face in Syria because I insulted them when they said to me, what are you doing in our country? And I said, I want to study your histories. They said, which one? Which history? They said. I said, the one before you. And they spat at me. To my passport, my American passport, in my face. So that was my welcome to Syria. And of course, that was in 2011. And that year started the war.
Right.
It's not over. That's still going. So, you had ISIS on top of it and what they did to the city of Palmyra. God, there's just so much to see. And I know it's costly because, my brother said, you could have had mansions by now. And I said, I'm living pretty well. One house is enough. I didn't have to go and buy houses and rents and do all that kind of thing. No, I wanted to add it to the knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, it's the experiences that you as an 8-year-old boy, wanted to do, and then you went out and did it. I mean, you as an 8-year-old boy, you probably didn't want a mansion. You didn't want multiple houses. I mean, one house is enough. And to do some of these amazing things and to have these near-death experiences, which is like a real life mission impossible for you. I mean, it's got to be like exhilarating.
It is when you walk into those places, like, exploring where Alexander the Great, where he was, then finding out that possibly he's really in the Mediterranean somewhere, buried under 15 feet of sand. Going into in the fourth story where I talk about going into the temple, and there was a hole in the temple, and I asked what that was about. And it's interesting to go from the 21st century of Alexandria, and then I stepped down a ladder, and within 10 seconds, there I was in first century Alexandria. And I walked into this abyss, and then suddenly I come across these tombs, and they didn't let me go too far. But, it's those types of things. So I keep on. I was going to go back to Egypt last year, but they haven't opened the museum yet. They've been promising for the last 5 years. So I'm going to go. It's going to be open next year between March and May. So I'll do that. But, now it's time where I've taken people with me. I have friends who will say, will you take me with you to this place? Especially women, because they're afraid to travel, especially in the Middle East, about themselves. And so they're afraid, like, members of my family who can't understand why I do certain things. Aren't you afraid, But after a while, you learn how to be a pro, to be a professional traveler. You have to know, that when you come to the airport, you've got to know that you don't take every Tom, Dick, and Harry to take you around to your hotel. I know enough people where I have them meet me at the airports and take me around. So I don't do things on my own that way, especially in Egypt, and also in Morocco, and also, well, I'm talking about the Middle East. Not to say Greek's different because I speak the language, and also with Greeks, you trust them. They're not going to kidnap you. Italians are not going to kidnap you.
Right.
But in the Middle East, when people are poor and they think because you travel, you're rich, they'll do anything to hustle you.
Do you have ideas for another series of podcasts?
Yes, I do, actually. I'm writing a script on Schliemann.
Okay.
It was already completed, but they gave me an idea. And so this gal and I are writing, bringing in the modern man into the ancient world, the way I've lived. And I'm doing, which I'm looking forward to, actually. I'm doing a biblical story. And then I think some of the stories in my book places I should record, because there are some, especially when I went to Marrakesh and to Fez and then eventually to Casablanca. That was one of the scariest things I've ever been in. That Casablanca, I would never go again. You know, though they don't get what they want, they do things, and you just go, you know. So I've never been in a place where I stayed in my hotel after a terrible experience in Casablanca, and I stayed for 3 days in my hotel room. That's how scared I got.
Wow.
There's too many of us in this world, and you can see how cheap life has become.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, with what's going on in the Middle East now, and you know, as badly as the Hamas attacked the Israelis, I mean, in such an awful way. But at the same time, look what we're doing to those innocent Palestinians. So, you know, and the thing is, you don't see other countries in the Middle East helping them. People don't want to get involved. And it's, you know, a problem that's been going on for centuries. Because it means now that, you know, I have my friend who was my guide in Egypt said, I cannot tell you how many cancellations we have every day. So look what it does, you know. Not only does it kill people, it kills people of their earnings. You know, how do they survive when their high season is cut down? And after that is the summer, and then there's nobody. How do they live? So it really, wars are just a terrible thing. I mean, you look at Russia and you look at what they're doing. I mean, you know, it's we're just in a sad state of affairs, I think, and it's in the way people think. And you know, I'm not crazy about the previous president and what he's contributed and allowed people to speak the way they speak to each other. And I don't like liars. You know, we're brought up and we get smacked in the face by our parents if we tell a lie. So we grow up telling the truth. And as actors, you tell the truth. That's what Spencer Tracy used to say as the actor. He says, you just walk up to your marker and you tell the truth. Well, we're not telling the truth anymore. It's not just the people, it's the governments as well. They're all lying. I mean, so you have to take care of yourself. And I think it's who you associate with and who you share with, and those who are less fortunate, you know, you help. But, you know, it's not a good time, really.
No. And even if you do tell the truth, you'll always have someone just, you know, retort back saying, oh, it's fake news.
But, you know, when the fake news comes, that's fake news, that's fake news. Yeah. And then it starts spreading around the world, it's fake news. You know, certain people, leaders, have given permission to the world to think it's all right to do certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Human beings are suffering. And then you think about religion. And the other thing is the hypocrisy. You know what I mean? If people do one thing and then expect you to do it because it appeals to them.
Right.
You know, that's where it leads. And, you know, when those ethics, those boundaries, those red lines are broken, anything can happen. And so why did we have all this education? And why, you know, there's a reason why we had boundaries and manners, and because things become then are civilized, and then, you know, you lose trust otherwise. And trust is a terrible thing to lose. You know, but, you know, I have a great family, and, you know, eventually I'll move back to Australia and spend my, you know, Renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
Always right, but I don't think I'll act in Australia. I think more and more I want to tell stories.
Right. And you've told some amazing stories with the podcast, and as well as Places, which is a fantastic book as well. And I can't wait to hear or read or see what is next with you, Thaao, because I'm a big fan. And congratulations, all the success.
Thank you, thank you, and I like romantic stories as well, even though they have tragedies. I
Yeah,
still like romantic stories. I love the dance of romance. That's always wonderful. And I mean, even when you read about what's going on with the romance of certain singer these days with a certain footballer, I
exactly.
mean, everybody goes crazy because it's like, oh, it's a great romance. It's a fantasy. It's a
Yeah,
fairy tale, and then it changes. I'm not saying this is not it.
yeah,
I hope it works out because you want to see people happy. You want to
yeah.
see people miserable. There's enough misery around. So I
Um,
love seeing happy people. It's like seeing a happy dog who sees you and wags his tail and gets all excited when they see you. That's a happy
yeah,
animal. That's a person to some people. Well, we need to give more happiness, and there's a lot to give thanks for. Remember that on this Thanksgiving. This is a very important Thanksgiving. People have to give thanks for what they've been through and survived, and what they give to each other, and make the choices that are choices that you don't have to regret and have to think later on, and that you taught somebody something that was not worthy. So, to this Thanksgiving, I wish them all well.
And a special thanks to Thaao for joining me today. The Lost Treasures is available on all the podcast sites. You can follow him on X, formerly Twitter, at Thaao Penghlis. The podcast is at LST Treasures Pod. And if you have a guest suggestion, hit me up on X, formerly Twitter, at the first 119, or like the page Reliving My Youth on Facebook. Go to iTunes, check out all the past episodes. If you find one you like, please rate and review the show. If you don't have iTunes, not a problem. Just on SoundCloud, Spotify, Podbean, Amazon Music, basically wherever you can find a podcast. New episode comes out soon. For everyone who celebrates Thanksgiving, I hope you have a great Thanksgiving and stay safe.